Dobrý večer všetkým. Zdá sa, že je tu horúco
Good
ešte
evening.
skôr, než sa začala samotná
It looks like it's hot here even before the discussion started. We are from the Ladislav Hanus company. Our society is the society of students, graduated, and also those who work. And its aim is to get to know things that we as Christians know, and the development of our personal and public life. And why we do such things? We are organizing semester courses, and we organize also events like this. Besides this event, we organize also the several events. So our aim is to develop a new type of festival that is academic, but we don't find it as only the university thing, but it's the privilege to deal with such things on academic ground. We want to find the truth, and we want to find the equation between Christian culture and current society. So we have two main questions. If the religion nowadays can inspire the public in the terms of economics, of arts, etc., and at the same time, what Christians can learn from current society. We hope that we will get some answers also this evening, and I will pass the word to our two presenters tonight. Welcome. I will add only one information. For those who have the headphones, can get the translation on the channel 1. And
welcome, ladies and gentlemen, at this event tonight. My name is Jakub.
And my name is Milena.
And both of us, we will lead you through this event tonight.
Just to show you maybe structure of this evening for tonight, first we'll start with 45 minutes lecture, then you'll have time for the kind of like a discussion session, also 45 minutes, and then we'll have a short presentation of a new book, What is Marriage?
Rumor has it that when actually a couple of weeks ago, this topic came here the first time with the announcement of the topic, it was announced in a way that, well, and we will have a discussion about sex, finally. So I guess, finally we are here. In a couple of minutes, I'll leave the floor for our distinguished guest. What is the topic? Topic of tonight's talk is going to be sex, state's interest in sexual expression, freedom or slavery. Just to give you a little teaser, questions that we will ask ourselves and our distinguished guests will introduce us into will regard something, for example, new kind of, I would say, thing, sexual expressionism. Have you ever heard of it? Well, I didn't, so it's going to be like this. And then we have what does the sexual revolution actually promises, and how does it delivers its promises? So these are like the questions that's going to be asked and answered throughout this talk.
To introduce the guest, I'll tell you a couple of information about her. Professor Alvaré is an associate professor of law at George Mason University, where she teaches family law, law and religion, and property law. She also has publications in various law reviews, academic journals, but also besides this, she regularly publishes in New York Times, the Washington Post, the Weekly Standard. Probably you know the names of all those. But also besides all of this, she speaks at various academic and professional conferences all over the world. The US, Europe, Latin America, Australia. And one of the interesting things is that she's also delegate to various United Nations conferences where she cooperates with the permanent observer mission of the Holy See.
And having said all of this, and without further ado, I think now it's the time to welcome once again our guest, And please, Professor Alvaré, the floor is yours.
On. It's on now. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you so much for coming. I will tell you, as an American professor, it is amazing to see so many students turn out for anything. So I was really loving Slovakia already, but this is definitely the most impressive thing yet. So thank you very much for coming. I look forward to a frank conversation this evening about several very current and very controversial issues. I am a professor who writes and speaks a great deal about questions that are very much in the news. Questions about human sexuality, male-female relationships, marriage, parenting, and family life. My interest in these areas started when I was working really during the whole 1990s for the American Catholic bishops. I was their national voice to the public. I spent a lot of time then interviewing hundreds of post-aborted women. And what I discovered was that no woman I met liked abortion. The abortion issue was not about abortion for her. Rather, women having abortions had already been formed by problematic ideas about the meaning of sex, of marriage, and of parenthood. Now they were pregnant in a situation in which they felt they could not have and rear their baby. But this was just the final act of tragedy in a long series of misbegotten ideas and tragic mistakes about sex, marriage, and family life. How did we come to this situation? Now, as we say, to paint with a very wide or broad brush, a significant problem is that women of my generation, and I think even more of yours, have been formed in a legal and cultural environment holding that sexual expression itself is a good. What I mean by this is performing sexual acts that an adult consents to. It is a good precisely as an individually desired and enjoyed act, but divorced from any notion of what sex actually, objectively is, or what it actually or objectively does. In a few words, sex makes a relationship. It just does. It bonds a man and a woman at some level, and it also makes new life. Whether or not the man and woman have any conscious intention of it doing so, it has weight, therefore, whether or not we humans act as if it does or act accordingly. But the state, not just private society, but the state in recent decades has chosen to valorize, to protect sexual expression itself. Again, consensual adult sexual activities separated from their relationship creating or new life creating possibilities. Many, many problems have flowed from this move by the state, despite numerous promises by politicians and interest groups and some intellectuals that only good could come from it. So with this brief background, what I would like to do tonight is the following couple of things. First, I want to describe the state's support for sexual expressionism. Second, because I'm a law professor, I want to describe mostly the legal path that it took to get there and the promises made along the way. Other disciplines would have other explanations about how we came to sexual expressionism, and I'll refer briefly to these. Third, I'm going to describe some of the consequences of the endorsing of sexual expressionism. And finally, I'm going to suggest that we really need to work toward ending this commitment by the state to sexual expressionism and actively work on crafting a new way to reach some of the good goals that were proposed but set aside by the misguided supporters of sexual expressionism. So first, I'm going to describe the state's current support for this thing that I call sexual expressionism. It probably hasn't escaped your attention the amount of energy that lawmakers in the EU and in the US devote to valorizing and protecting sexual expression. This is visible in their efforts to promote accessible contraception and abortion, even to the very young, but definitely to all women, on the grounds that they expect that sexual expression outside of a committed relationship will be frequent, and that it requires ways to avoid childbearing, even after sex with emergency contraception. Some lawmakers have gone so far as to celebrate even uncommitted sexual encounters. In the US, we see this in two famous decisions by our highest court, the Supreme Court. In these, our justices opined that the right to have sex with whomever you wish, with a same-sex or opposite-sex partner, married or single, is a liberty interest of the highest constitutional proportions. Here's how they described it. They said, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. The public did laugh at that, by the way. I mean, sort of an intense description of the Constitution. But that's how they describe the right to sexual expression, as forming your own identity and your own universe. Another way you can see that the law has endorsed sexual expressionism is the insistence, I know in the EU, and you see it in some places in the US, I definitely see it at the UN, the insistence that comprehensive sexuality education be provided even to children over their parents' objections. And I have looked at all the data. They insist on this despite the fact that the data shows no real substantial good effects on the children and young adults. No reduction in sexually transmitted infections. No reductions in non-marital pregnancies. But they insist still that it is a good. I think this is just evidence of sexual expressionism. This can also be seen when states support redefining marriage so that it could include a partnership of two persons of the same sex. In so doing, the government supporting this have asserted, both in their public statements and in their legal arguments to the courts, that the state has no interest whatsoever in linking children with their natural parents. But the state is interested in affirming the sexual expression and the emotional bonds felt by two people of the same sex. In the US, our Obama administration actually filed a document with our federal courts stating that they thought the state had no interest in helping children be raised with their natural parents. None at all. I don't know precisely about the situation in Slovakia, but I can tell you that in my country, no matter how much cause for concern we have any day of the year about the economy or international affairs or yet another tragic shooting or terrorist incident, you will see in the newspapers nearly hysterical articles and efforts to push contraception, abortion, same-sex marriage into the public arena, into even religious institutions. So, I think that generally describes sexual expressionism's existence in the public square. How did we get to this point where law and culture appear to be endorsing this? I can only offer introductory words on this in a kind of chronological, legal, step-by-step account. So, I think to say in the introduction to this, much of what we see today flows from misguided attempts to put women and the poor and men's and women's relationships into a better position, to promote their equality before the law, to improve their opportunities for happiness, for recognizing their dignity, for relational and intellectual and financial flourishing. The basis for the adoption, however, of sexual expressionism toward these goals, however, is a dangerous mixture of the true, the confused, and the harmful. First point here, men have denied women's opportunities and suppressed their equality for millennia. Poor women have suffered even more from this. Second, a significant reason for men treating women poorly, for suggesting they were not equal, is women's differences, particularly their ability to procreate and the factors that go with this. Women's nearly universal inclination toward having children and toward spending considerable time with them, and women's relatively lesser interest in prioritizing a career or paid work over their family life. A third point here, while society often praises motherhood, it often really treats mother's work in the home as having lesser value than work outside the home. So you can see how women reacted to this by declaring that we would take away the causes of our oppression. The fact that we bore children and took care of them. This is the logic that was used in the move toward contraception and abortion as the sine qua non of women's rights. At the same time as this was happening, some proponents of the sexual revolution and some strands of feminism were arguing that there was a need to free sex itself from guilt and repression. And again, a need to provide sex to women on the same terms as provided to men, as a matter of equality. That is, sex without babies. To accomplish this goal, it was proposed that the link between sex and procreation must be broken. Contraception doesn't do this, it fails. Most women seeking abortions were using contraception near the time they became pregnant. Earlier in time, the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, and disciples of Sigmund Freud suggested that when sex and procreation were divorced, there would flourish personal joy, superior relations between men and women, fewer non-marital or unwanted births, happier marriages, and that every child would be a wanted and loved child. Near in time to all these developments came the technology shock of the pill in 1960, promising to put a final end to the link between sex and procreation. Many observers prophesied that this was the long-awaited development that could finally free women, especially poor women. Now the legal battles began. In my part of the world, these were conducted mostly before elite and sympathetic judges, as the majority of the population was still very resistant to overthrowing classical sexual norms. What were these norms? They might be summarized as the rules and practices which kept sex, marriage, and children together. This is a brief phrase, but it has many implications. If you wanted to keep sex, marriage, and children together, you would frown on non-marital sex. It's not good to have children outside of a committed relationship. You would frown on non-marital child rearing for the same reason. You would disparage cohabitation as a very risky way to conduct a sexual partnership which could lead to children. You would make divorce difficult to get. After all, this might hurt the children born into the marriage. Such sexual norms would worry about contraception even within marriage as a vehicle for reducing the weight of sex or for reducing the impediments to adultery. It would worry a lot about the incentives that contraception would create among the unmarried. So how did Western laws, bit by bit, reverse these norms? The usual path was this. First, by making sure, that the law allowed married people access to contraception on the ground that private places and a universally recognized private relationship were involved. Second, the next move was to let single women and men access to contraception on the grounds that privacy wasn't just about places or marriage, but about decisions. And it's a very private decision whether or not to procreate. Also, we didn't want to punish single people for having sex by making them have a baby. Also, the claim began at this period that widespread access to contraception would drive down non-marital and teen pregnancy rates, and it would decrease people's access or their interest in abortion, which was still illegal in many places. The next move was to allow abortion for most of the same reasons you just allowed contraception. Privacy and importance to the woman, especially if she was seeking to avoid ill health or poverty or social stigma. There was also the suggestion that an unwanted child would definitely have a miserable life. Now, lawmakers began to notice at this point in the development of the law that despite low cost or even free contraception and legal abortion, rates of non-marital pregnancies and births and teen pregnancies were actually increasing, along with numbers of abortions and rates of sexually transmitted diseases, all of this among the poor. So everything that was supposed to be fixed was getting worse. When morning after pills, emergency contraception was developed, lawmakers thought, well, okay, contraception is failing us as a policy. Let's give emergency contraception out. Let's give it to girls to carry around with them. Especially let's give it to the poorest and youngest girls. Some governments and interest groups in the US, working closely with Planned Parenthood, started insisting that we not only give poor women free contraception, but we offer to give them long-lasting contraception, like injections in their arms, or sterilization, or free abortion in exchange for social welfare benefits that allow them to buy food and clothing and housing. That move met with some resistance, but it was tried by 7 different jurisdictions in the United States. Finally, today, in the United States, the government is insisting that even religious employers, individuals, institutions, provide health insurance, giving free contraception, free sterilization, and free early abortion medicine to all their employees and even their minor daughters. The government is using the same argument it's always used. This is about women's rights and equality. This is about women's health, which depends on their being able to have sex whenever they wish, but no babies. Now to my third point. What has really happened to the well-being of those persons and groups who were supposed to benefit from sexual expressionism? We have a lot of data on this point, an overwhelming amount of data, really. So let's take a look. First, we can see that on average, privileged women, women with a higher education, are benefiting a lot. So are married couples where a privileged woman is married to a privileged man. What is interesting about this is that these groups have held on to more than a few pieces of the traditional sexual norm. They have more often kept sex and marriage and children together. One point of comparison in the US tells almost the whole story. If you are a woman with a university education, only 6% of you will have a baby without a marriage. If you are a woman without a high school degree, 54% of you will have a baby without a marriage. If you are a woman with a high school degree, 44% of you will have a baby but not a marriage. Among the most disadvantaged group in the United States, African Americans, 52% of African American women will never marry. That is as against a rate of, on average in the United States, of over 85%. It's an incredible differential. The most privileged, then, are financially well off. They are well positioned to send their children to the best schools and to start that successful cycle all over again when their children meet other successful children having a fine education. But now let's look at less privileged women. They marry far less often. They have an earlier sexual debut. They cohabit a lot more than their more privileged sisters. And remember, statistically, I think this is true worldwide. Women dislike cohabitation compared to men. Women will cohabit in a population more when men are scarce. Women will marry more in a population where women are more scarce. Cohabitation is more violent for women, 5 to 8 times. It is short-lived, and it is the #2 predictor of divorce in the United States, second only to marrying when you're 18 or 19 years old, which is the first predictor. Less privileged women have drastically more non-marital pregnancies and births, far more abortions, and far more divorce. Poor women will divorce in about 52%, more than 1 out of 2 cases. Women with a college degree will divorce at a rate of about 16%, which is drastically lower. Rates of many sexually transmitted infections, which in the US are soaring in many categories, are much higher among the poor. On average, in the US, 1 out of every 4 teenage girls has a sexually transmitted infection. Among the poor, 1 out of 2. It's huge. Overall, interestingly also, measurements of women's unhappiness over the last 40 years are increasing. Women reported in a very well-regarded study by the 2 most prominent economists of the family at the University of Pennsylvania that they are less happy than they were in reports 40 years ago, and for the first time in modern history, less happy than men. Many observers are linking this to the current conditions for women in the sex, mating, and marriage markets. Many economists, including the Nobel Prize-winning economist George Akerlof, are writing that maybe this is explained by the economic phenomenon called risk compensation. This is that the perceived reduced risk of sex, reduced risk from contraception and abortion, makes risky behavior more common. It drives women to more non-relationship sexual encounters, and is why we are seeing more, not fewer, non-marital births among women, despite the saturation of the public with contraception and abortion. Some economists have said that the technology shock of widely available contraception and abortion also explains possibly the fact that women file for about 70% of all divorces in the United States. Men only file 30% of all divorce actions. These economists have proposed that possibly women who are more present in the marriage market than men settle for someone that they didn't actually want to marry at the margins, and then when they become disappointed during the marriage, seek more often to leave. Poor women and men, as I've said, are in the worst shape generally, and in the United States, it is now the case that the marriage gap is the #1 explanation of the gap between the rich and the poor. It's not race, it's not even education. It's whether or not a person is married that most prominently marks the line between the well-off and the less well-off. Of course, when mothers lose and male-female partnership loses, children lose. There's a consensus in the literature that children do best raised by their stably married mother and father. They attain emotional and other kinds of stability, educational, when they are anchored in a family they know and love, a family with a history that they come to know and identify with, and then to take their place within and to pass on. One final note about the modern consequences of sexual expressionism. This commitment to this philosophy by the state, along with some interest groups, particularly some you may know here, Planned Parenthood is one, the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy, a very, very rich think tank associated with Columbia University in New York. This is leading to unprecedented clashes with the freedom of religion, which is a human right. Despite religious individuals and institutions' excellent track records regarding family outcomes, despite their care for the most vulnerable in society, despite the empirical failure of sexual expressionism as a policy, there is a huge push to marginalize religious voices who oppose sexual expressionism. Currently in the US, there are dozens of lawsuits fighting the Obama administration on this matter. And thus far, religious institutions are winning most of them. but the matter has not yet gotten to our Supreme Court. Final point. I want to suggest that we had better work toward ending this commitment by the state to sexual expressionism and work to craft a better way to reach some of those good goals that I described to you at the beginning. Again, this is a huge topic, and I can only share some observations with you on it. First, I think the first thing we can do is to hold the state and interest groups to account for their failed predictions. Remind them of what they promised. Show them what was actually delivered. And by the way, always be truthful and use the best empirical data. We have it. Next, take up the conversation, I think, from an anthropological perspective. By this, I mean a perspective with a particular view of the nature of the human person. Proponents of sexual expressionism, they have definitely adopted a view of the human person. It's a philosophical or theological anthropology. Hold this up to the light for everybody to see. Ask listeners if they believe people are made for society, for real connection, for lifetime relationships and love and stable care. Ask them if people become happy by taking other people into account, by service, by interdependent love, or rather, if people are made happy by the anthropology of sexual expressionism, by acting for their own pleasure as they see it for the very short term. Ask people if anything can substitute for the daily, committed, long-term family experiences, for coming to understand the meaning of faithful love. If anything can substitute for the family, for striking the balance between attention to the individual and the community, for learning the ways of mutual service, care for the vulnerable, solidarity between the old and the young. Can friends or work colleagues, people with whom we do not have a complete, committed, familial, or one flesh relationship, really serve all those purposes? Or do we actually need the family as a social institution? Finally, for those open to the idea that a Christian view of the world and human beings could shed additional light on our situation, ask whether or not they understand human beings as Christians do. We understand us as made in the image of a Trinitarian God, an intrinsically social God. Are we supposed to be like Jesus, who, when we're at our best, commit unconditionally, body and soul, to love the people put into our lives, which begins with the family which we're given? Ask if it could really be true that sex, the source of profound adult bonds and human life itself, could really be reduced to a vehicle just for pleasure or for creating your own identity? Ask if the body could really be that separate from the soul. Suggest even this large thought, that maybe in our times, as in the earliest Christian times, this Christian view of human sexuality might represent, in some very large way, how Christianity stands against the prevailing culture's devaluation, especially of women's bodies and women's persons, and the growing notion that human beings are just masters of their bodies, their fates, the world, and God is not the master. If you think at all as I do, that people are today deeply dissatisfied with the marketplaces of sex and marriage, the whole set of ideas I have called sexual expressionism. If you believe that men and women, particularly the disadvantaged, long for more and are built with a receptivity to the truth, then perhaps you too will want to take up some role in challenging this misguided dogma called sexual expressionism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we have time for your questions, so please feel free to ask whatever's on your mind right now. Just a little rule, please stand up while you're giving question, and please wait for the microphone to come to you. So if there's any question, please raise your hand.
Sit down.
I'd like to ask you, where can we get these statistics you were talking about?
Yes, okay. And that's going to be translated for you, right? So I can reply in English. That's right, I have to see, okay, who am I replying in English? He's telling you in Slovak. So there are many articles, but the very best articles are on the internet on a site called the National Marriage Project. Do you have a pen? The National Marriage Project. The other place is called the Institute for American Values. These are run by the leading sociologists in the United States on the family. The most prominent sociologists in the United States every single year gather the data on this material. And by the way, they're seeking to gather data for more and more countries in the world. And there's a project they have called the World Family Map, I think. And I think some of it's online for free, and some of it one has to subscribe to for money. But a school could subscribe to it for a library. And it is following family statistics around the world of this type where they exist. Thank you.
Next question. Please feel free to raise your hand, and our assistants will find you meanwhile.
Thank you for you have came here. I would like to ask you, what do you think? Who has a main benefit from this disorder? You said that politicians make the law, but who has the profit from it?
Yes.
What do you think, personally?
That's a great question, because clearly it's hurting so many people that the natural question is who's benefiting, right? There are a couple things to say. Number one, it probably hasn't escaped your attention in your own country or at the level of politics of the EU or at the United Nations or in my own country, that the most wealthy and elite organizations and voices often dominate the conversation. In the newspaper, in the entertainment world, in the media, in the academy. They also give the most money to political campaigns, right? They are very, very attached still to the ideology of sexual expressionism. In some cases, because it's worked out fine in their own lives. With money, they can buy their way out of some of the worst problems, right? A single mother has two problems, usually. Poverty and no father. A really rich single mother can overcome some of the disadvantages, not all, of the no father with more money, and can prevent, for instance, the kinds of instability or lousy schools in a poor neighborhood, etc., that a poor mother cannot. So in some ways, it's being promoted by the people who believe they can basically have their sex, eat their cake, and have it too. right? It is also promoted by politicians who are not really thinking. I think it was Pope Benedict who made a comment about a main problem with modernity is a lack of thought, which seems such a, what does he mean by that? But what I'm saying, yes, they never resort to the statistics. I will give you an example. The federal government, my federal government, has claimed that they could significantly improve women's health if every employer was forced to give her free contraception and early abortion and sterilization. They publish a government report, right? It's 235 pages about women's health. 8 pages are about contraception. The claim that this was linked to improve health for women, let me just tell you, I wrote a 104-page article undoing their claim. They cited only 2 studies to make this claim. Both of the studies were written by Planned Parenthood, the largest provider of abortion and contraception in the United States, or Planned Parenthood's research associates, the Guttmacher Institute. The newspapers report those. I go, I read those studies, I read the footnotes of those studies, I read all the studies they didn't cite, that challenge them. The government is wrong. The newspapers don't report it. It doesn't get reported on the television. The government makes those statements in the briefs it files in court. It does not get challenged in most cases. It just doesn't. So I guess I would have to say the shorter answer is the powerful political, pharmaceutical, corporate, media, entertainment classes feel that they benefit. And they actually, like many, many elites from many millennia, don't really worry about the situation of the poor, or they are too proud to admit that everything they predicted is wrong, and they have worsened the lives of the poor in the long run. It's not satisfactory, but there it is.
If I could link to this question, maybe from my own experience in the UN, what's, in your opinion, the relationship between, for example, Planned Parenthood and the UN itself? Because as you mentioned, many governments, or maybe the UN itself, doesn't really listen to the statistics that you mentioned.
Right. The relationship between Planned Parenthood or the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy or the United Nations, it is very, very intertwined, okay? The former head of the International Planned Parenthood Federation will be named a special rapporteur, or will be the head of a UN's Women's Conference, or a conference on population and development, which will end up focusing more on contraception than on clean water or women's access to education. The Planned Parenthood International will pay for delegates from poorer countries to come over. My own country, the United States, does that. It was a little embarrassing for the US delegation at the recent United Nations Conference on Women when many of the delegates from poorer countries would stand up and say, "Thank you for making it possible for us to be here." I mean, it was clear the US had paid certain delegates to come. The US had taken certain positions and persuaded these delegates to do that. I'm sure that the European Union has very close relationships with certain large, multinational interest groups or NGOs that are very, very strongly attached to the idea of contraception or abortion as a solution, and helps them to be present at United Nations conferences in order to speak.
And what is usually your, how do you feel about your status being at the UN conferences with a totally different opinion?
Yes. it's good not to really want to be liked very much. If you are going to go to the United Nations, as I did, with these views as a member of the Holy See's delegation. And I've been in this position many decades now. And my response as a person, as a woman, as a Catholic, is first to try and be the best prepared person in the room, so that I feel I have the best information from the most, credible sources, so that I do the honor to my conversation partner of telling the truth, right? That I don't try and bias the data. I try and stay very cheerful. I try and take a spiritual attitude that I may not win every time, but maybe I could be a little light sometimes, that these ideas have suffered difficulty and persecution, and why should our time be any different? I ended my talk with the reflection that Christianity had some of its beginnings in a struggle with the pagan world around it about the position of women, the position of children, marriage relationships between men and women, and we're simply having a modern version of that struggle now. And there are many people around me that I work with who are so smart and so cheerful, and we're a happy little band when we do it together. And it's good to be in a group when you're doing it. And it's hard because when I go for the Holy See, my own US delegation, hates everything coming out of my mouth. But it just makes me feel that I'll try and do the best job I can.
Another question?
Thank you. Juraj Šust. As I understood, the sexualism is a view to have sex just for pleasure, quite hedonistic and libertarian view of the sex. But I believe the dominant view of sex here is for romantic reasons. Mm-hmm. So I love someone, so why I shouldn't have sex with the person whom I love?
Right.
Eventually, maybe I will marry him or her and have babies.
Right.
But later, let's say. So what would you answer to this?
That's a great presentation of it. A person will say it's romantic because they are having a sexual attraction to another person, right? But it all depends on how you define things, doesn't it? Because if by romance you mean I'm expressing to you how I feel, I hope you feel the same back, but you don't mean what sex says in itself, which says, I am doing something that is one flesh. I am doing something, if you brought an OBGYN or an endocrinologist here, they would tell you, I am doing something that biologically has a bonding element, especially with respect to the woman's reaction biologically. I am doing something that no matter how much contraception I swallow, maybe sterilization could achieve it, but has the possibility of creating a new human life that will eternally link me with this person. So I am doing something that I have subjectively declared is just an expression of my feelings for you. But it turns out what I am actually doing is something that has all these other effects and intrinsic characteristics and traits that you cannot take away. They are what they are. There was a OBGYN at dinner with us tonight, and he said something like, I forget the way he put it, but people can lie to one another, but nature never lies. and we are built in terms of intimate relationships such that the reaction between a man and a woman, and the possibility for the child is a part of sex, even if subjectively we say it is not. Since I'm in the, I'm not, you're not near Norway, but you're nearer to Norway than I am, and there's a Norwegian author I want to recall to you. I don't know if you've read her, Sigrid Undset, and her book, Kristin Lavransdatter. It's considered maybe the greatest Catholic novel of all time. There is a scene in there where she has a romantic feeling for Erland. He reciprocates, and she has a sexual encounter with him. He's married to somebody else. And he goes to leave, and he says he'll be back in touch. And she makes this statement that is perfect for what I'm trying to convey here, particularly about a woman's response to the idea, it's just romance, maybe we'll marry later. She says he leaves, and Kristin reflects, he was to go now, but she could not understand how this could be so. Because weren't they tied in some way? How could he be away indefinitely after what had just happened? And the world can, and people can subjectively tell themselves that sex is nothing. But it actually is something in itself, whatever you say. And particularly if a person is religious, the idea that one could conclude that God, who could have put procreation anywhere, put it here for no particular reason, makes no sense. There must be something special about sex if this is the origin of all life on our planet. There must be something. So that's the long and boring response that I would make to the person who asked that very short question, and they probably would have left before I was finished. But if I wrote it down, I'd try and shorten it.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I want to ask, what's your opinion about the situation about American nuns? Yeah. I've read also new Pope got into this. I don't know if they got excommunicated, or how is it got so big in the inner parts of church, and what's your opinion on this? Thank you.
Thank you. First, I have to compliment all of you on your wonderful English. It's very kind of you to address me in English, and I'm very impressed as I travel, and here in particular. The situation to which the gentleman is referring is that the Holy See has issued a document. It is called a doctrinal assessment of a particular group, not all, but a particular group of American nuns called the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. This is a group of nuns I have had occasion to visit with some of their leadership over the years. And to try and summarize the situation, they are in true doctrinal tension with the church. The American media characterized the fight wrongly. They said the Vatican wanted the nuns to spend more time on the abortion issue. As usual, the American media did not read the document. If you read the document, the doctrinal assessment, the question was that some of the sisters had questioned things like the divinity of Jesus Christ. They were refusing at their meetings to have masses on the grounds that they did not want to associate themselves with a male priesthood as it exists in the church. When you visited with leadership of them, and when they were asked recently on TV explicitly, did they oppose the legal killing of the unborn, they could not bring themselves to say that they thought abortion was wrong. Essentially what the American media likes about them is that they are really, really excellent in their social work. And there is no doubt that they have performed marvelous social services for the vulnerable in the United States. What the doctrinal assessment said about this was, we are very grateful for your work. And in fact, the story of the Catholic Church in America is very largely the story of your pioneering work. But, and you may remember Pope Francis has said this recently, you are becoming like NGOs without a profession of faith in Jesus Christ. That you are very effective at being social service organizations, but it is no longer based in the Catholic religion. It is rather, you know, a secular philosophy of the common good with some very good care, but we wish to be Catholic in doing it. So that's the situation. Pope Francis has said that he affirms the existing report. And if you read the report, I was laughing with a colleague who's teaching here in Slovakia. It is very American to begin every critique of something with a compliment. So as a professor, I always grade students' papers first by giving them a compliment about something good in the paper, and then I move to the critique. And this document, which was written with the help of several American bishops, begins with many compliments and then moves to the critique. But it is not a harsh or document. It is not what we would call a smearing, a non-specific knocking of someone's reputation. It cites specific doctrinal difficulties, but it has been characterized as the bishops versus the nuns. Very ugly. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My question goes to same-sex marriage. You were not necessarily talking about this topic during your presentation, but I would like to ask, how do you explain, I think, an obvious contradiction when you look on the quest for same-sex marriage in the society? It seems like there is still a very big regard for marriage, because if that would not be the case, they could have chosen same-sex cohabitation, but not a marriage, right? So I would just like to hear your take on it. How do you explain that obvious contradiction? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think there is much of a contradiction, actually, in fact. Marriage between a man and a woman in most societies throughout the world, through history, has garnered about 80 or 90% participation, right, of men and women. Where marriage has been opened up to same-sex couples, I should say redefined to include, and I'll get to that, you get like a 2 to 3% take-up. So in other words, there isn't actually this huge regard for marriage, or they would be rushing to enter marriage. But even in societies that have had it for a while, the Netherlands and elsewhere, in Massachusetts, they've had it for 10 years, there isn't much same-sex marriage. That's the first thing to say. Second, to say that they want same-sex marriage because they have a high regard for marriage is confusing at the level of words. They have a high regard for what they wish to define as marriage. They have a high regard for a more or less strong, emotional, sexual relationship that they wish the state to bless. They have a high regard for the state blessing that in order to affirm the equality of same-sex behavior or relationships. They do not have a high regard. In fact, they completely disregard or disaffirm what marriage has always been in law and culture for millennia. The best summary of marriage in the history of the world was done by a German professor, Edward Westermarck, and it's just called, in 2 volumes, The History of Human Marriage. It's about 2,000 pages, and it takes up every tribe and country and culture. I think it stopped like in the 1920s. It's an older tome. But marriage has always been, in culture and in law, what? It's something the state recognizes. It exists prior to the state, but the state wishes to affirm it as the endorsing of the union of a man and woman and the linking of the two with their children. It's the only institution anywhere. There is no other way that we have to link children to the 2 people who gave them life and who have, at a practical and evolutionary, every other kind of level, emotional, the incentive to care for those particular children in a permanent and loving way. There's just no replacement for that. It's the only thing we've got. In my view, same-sex couples came to the idea of pressing for a redefinition of marriage because they had been abused and oppressed as individuals in the past. And they decided that the single best statement that a society could make, that what they were doing as a same-sex couple was good, not bad, not worthy of oppression, but good, was to bless it in a way society blessed the sexual relations between a man and a woman. They chose marriage as a remedy for past discrimination. But it turns out we actually need marriage to perform a different kind of work. We should certainly work on laws that remove the abuse or oppression of persons with same-sex or bisexual attraction. But we shouldn't destroy or deform or redefine the only thing we've got to take care of children and link them to their parents as a remedy for our past mistreatment of people with same-sex and bisexual attraction.
Tu sme mali otázku vpredu, poprosím ruky hore ešte raz.
Thank you very much for your coming here and for your very nice talk and giving us information which we really need. What I want to ask is 2 questions. What we, usual students, people, working guys, should do, can do? Should we address emails to our governments? Should we stand up into public squares, or should we write blogs, or should we? What can we really do as usual people? And the second question is how, if you are working in UN, how Islamic countries are responding to these challenges?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. First, I am a huge believer that more happens at a local level than from the top down. So to your first question, the following. Number 1, you know that everybody likes to know what your generation is thinking. That older people are very impressed when opinions start to change among people your age. So for instance, in the United States, the Catholic Church is always being told, oh, you're young people, they've totally stopped listening to you. They're changing their opinions on sex and marriage, and they're leaving you behind. They are the future, and you will be the past, right? So it's very important, in order not only to affect the laws that affect you, but also to give hope to the leaders of institutions, churches, governments, private institutions, universities. Give hope to the current generation running those to make your opinions known in student newspapers, in local newspapers, in opportunities to testify in front of a local government, in invited speakers, student actions, whether you go to some kind of street protest or something else. You think, oh, you know, what could I do? But politicians and university leaders and media leaders pay a lot of attention to what people your age do. You may be familiar with that Occupy Wall Street movement in the US. Every 50 and 60-year-old member of the US Congress was, having to react to what the 19-year-olds were doing on Wall Street. They do not wish to be the past. The politicians want always to be the future, right? So they want to be where you are, right? It's really important at the student level, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, for graduate students, that you make your opinions known where leaders can see them. And that means local papers. I mean, in Washington, our politicians, they clip the letters out of their local papers. I wrote an open letter to the Obama administration about religious freedom and women. Through accident, friends sent it to friends. 41,000 women have now signed my letter. I write to them every 2 weeks. I have them on a database and I write them letters. And what do they do now? Then I help them write letters to their members of Congress. I help them learn how to speak to their politicians, to write editorial letters in the local paper, to give a talk at their church. I give them information, articles, what we call talking points, right? So it's just that local action is critical. And trying to change the president of a country, change your local politician, let them know, and then everyone else will. The most powerful movements are bottom up, not top down. On the point of the United Nations and the Islamic countries, it's very interesting dynamics, right? The Holy See has sympathetic conversations with any delegation who understands that it's possible for people of a nation to be very religious and that it's okay to be very religious. There is also in Catholic teaching, however, in Dignitatis Humanae, which is the document on religious freedom from the Vatican II conference, a very developed theology of the contents, but also the limits of religious freedom, right? I was asked about this on, TV Station 3 today or something. And there is a strong Roman Catholic, and I think it's easily understood at the natural law level, that the human right of religious freedom is important, but it's not the only right there is, right? There are other human rights. So that there are due limits on the human right of religious freedom. So if somebody is making a claim that in the name of religion, it would be acceptable to do something harmful to the human person, to kill, to physically injure. Some of the practices we come up against at the United Nations include like female genital mutilation, right? Which some claim is a religious or cultural practice. The Holy See will make it clear that religion is never to be used as an excuse or a cloak for a violation of a human right, right? So we work with any delegation, Islamic delegations and others, who understand the importance of religious freedom, while always in our conversation there, keeping in mind the limitation on religious freedom in favor of other human rights. On this, I think a very excellent sets of statements have been made by Pope Benedict in the past, and there's a lot of good reading that he has done in this, writing that he has done in this area. Okay, thank you.
Okay, there was a girl in the middle, and then there was a question here in front. We'll take 2 questions now.
Okay, I would like to turn back a bit to your lecture. You mentioned this marriage gap and also much higher non-marital pregnancy rates among poor women compared to the rich. So my question is, what is your explanation for this, taking into account the accessibility of contraception? Because this might seem a bit paradoxical.
Yes,
Thank you.
excellent question. I actually happily spent 1.5 years on that question. And I wrote an article. It is in English, and it is on there's a web page called the Social Science Research Network, SSRN, and most professors have a page on it, and it contains my article on this subject. And the article is called Beyond the Sex Ed Wars, Disadvantaged Single Mothers Search for Community, okay? So what's the explanation? Here we have the poor population, which is the population to whom the government is giving the most free birth control. It's absolutely free. And many of them can get absolutely free abortions too. And yet, they are having, among the poorest populations, 50, and in the African American community in the US, 75% non-marital births. 7.5 out of 10, okay? What's the explanation? The explanation is obviously varied. Some people say, oh, it's just contraceptive failure. But contraception fails a lot, right? But it doesn't fail that often, right? It's about, if you took like even the pill very regularly, it would still fail about 12% per year, according to the data on it. So part of it is that people who are being given contraception are not using it properly, or the contraception, they're using it, but the method is not that effective per se. Another part of it, and there's a book on it, if you are interested in an English language book, it's so famous that I wonder if it has been translated into many languages. It's the best study ever done of poor single mothers. And it's very sad, but very beautiful in a way. It's called Promises I Can Keep: Why Single Women Put Motherhood Before Marriage. Why poor women put motherhood before marriage. And the women there said, listen, all of us know how to get contraception. In fact, many of us believe the government is putting it in our water because they really do not want us to have babies that the government will have to support. But we want babies. We don't think we're going to go to college. Our life's work, we would like to be children. Or we don't think we're ever going to find someone to marry. In the poorest communities in the United States, especially African American, the percentage of men who are in prison is very high. The percentage of men who are violent or have drug addiction problems is much higher than average. They don't have fathers in the home. And there is a correlation, probably some causation, with their crime rates. So there aren't really marriageable men. So they want children in their lives. There aren't men in their community to marry. They want a baby sometime. They think it's better to have it when you're younger. Economists would say their opportunity costs are very low. By having the baby, they're not giving up some other high-paying job. Some of the women are more specific, and they say that the men that they were sleeping with told them that if they really loved them, they wouldn't use a condom. If you really love me, you'll trust me. Sometimes the women said that they wanted to get pregnant because they thought maybe that would induce the man to think about marriage. So I looked at all of this research, all the qualitative literature and all the quantitative literature, and trying to summarize it, one way that I put it is the following. I said, these women, like all women, like all people, they want to be what they really are, which is, we're gifts, right? What did John Paul II say? The human person is meant to be a gift to somebody else. We're meant to love and be loved. That's all these women wanted too. They didn't see that opportunity often in their family of origin. They don't see that opportunity in the family of their future. The only place they see that opportunity is in a child. And so they have the child, and they're very happy to have that child. They are very happy to have that child. And until they have the possibility for some other way to be a gift to somebody, they're probably going to have those children. We have to find a way to bring marriage and a married life into the horizon so that people are raising their sons and daughters in a way that they don't do this, and so that those sons and daughters can see a future for themselves where they can give gifts and receive gifts in a family.
There was a question here in front, and then a question here, so we'll just take it in order, and then a girl in the back, yeah.
Good evening. I would like to ask you a little philosophical question, maybe. So nowadays it looks like that the government just listens to the public sentiments. So do you think that is the role or the responsibility of government to lead the people to virtuous life and, for example, forbid the contraception? Or do you think that this is the responsibility of Christian communities or, I don't know, other part of society?
Wow.
Thank you.
That is a big question. A question that you're asking is the title of a really great book called Making Men Moral. You know, and the subtext of the book is, can the law make men moral, right? In my view, if we believe that government is a natural human institution, then it partakes in some way of the necessity of the role of helping people be moral. Now, law is a very, very blunt instrument, not fine and precise. And so, in my view, a large part of what the government can and should do is to stay out of the way of smaller groups. This is the principle of subsidiarity, trying to form their children, themselves, their extended families, their communities, their nations. When the government introduces very specific messages in sex education, or makes statements that there is no social interest in linking children with their families, the government is actively speaking against human interests and human rights. I would be happy if the government would be quiet in those arenas and to allow families and parishes to do the good formation and not get in our way. However, there are some things that are too large, right, for smaller groups to do that are a necessity for the larger community. Taking care of the environment is a perfect example, right? For those of you who have studied economics on this, right? individuals are going to create these externalities, right? These external harmful effects that they will not take into account in their behavior. And how can you get people to take them into account if they're polluting, etc.? A town 2 miles away. At some point, you're going to need government regulations, right? Let's bring this analogy to marriage. You know, why do I even want the state in marriage? Do I want them to help make men moral? By men, I'm referring to all human beings. Wealthy people, as I think I've explained, will always seem to land on their feet and will and have continued to get married first, have their children, stay married more often, not always, but more often, send their children to good schools where they meet other people who get married to one another and then start the cycle all over again. The poor seem to be needing help right now. And in the US, let's think about this, right? We have African Americans who were first brought over as slaves in my country, and who from the very beginning were disadvantaged in their family lives. Slavery helped create the culture of separating sex from marriage from children. This was perpetuated, the pressure on this, by discriminatory laws that made it very hard for a man to earn a living. Interestingly, they made it easier for women to earn a living, right? But that too was a pressure on marriage. Now we have the situation of the next set of immigrants in the US, which is Hispanic Americans, and partly because of the economy, but also because of the messages in the media and advertising and the pressure now from our government making contraception and abortion a big part of its message to Hispanics. The government is introducing harmful messages, right? So sometimes these groups need the assistance that the government can provide in shoring up an institution like marriage. The same way that sometimes only the government can assist with something like the environment. So I prefer that families and schools and communities in a subsidiary way form and shape in this. But when we're talking about the kind of threat to the well-being of entire segments of society now that this loss of marriage represents, I need the government in its sex ed training, in its messages wherever to the people to shape up, to be giving messages that link sex with marriage and taking care of children instead of divorcing these realities. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we'll take a very short last question. And there's going to be a space after to ask in person other questions.
Good evening. My name is Michal Krčmery, member of the Ladislav Hanus Fellowship and alumni of College Anton Neuwirth. Well, Professor Alvaré, one of the major political achievements of the Obama administration was the healthcare reform, which promoted what you explained as sexual expressionism or values associated with this, and suppressed religious freedoms. On the other hand, many of the leaders of the Democratic Party, especially Vice President Joe Biden, former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, claim themselves as devout Catholics. As well, many of the supporters or voters of the Democratic Party are Catholics. How do you explain this societal paradox in the US?
Right. The healthcare issue is, it has several elements to it, right? The Catholic Church in the United States officially supported this healthcare reform because it would provide healthcare insurance for every American, which seems like we would have done that already, but we did not. So we knew we needed some healthcare reform. But then there were these provisions in the bills that were against Catholic conscience. the Catholic Church actually, at the very last minutes of those negotiations, the Catholic hospitals, the Catholic charities said, we would be strong supporters of this legislation if you would please just remove these problematic conscience and abortion funding provisions. And the administration claimed it did, but did not. I mean, we now have federal judges affirming that they did not. So, in the end, how to explain this dichotomy? Well, several things. Number one, many people call themselves Catholic all over the world, right? But only a certain percentage actually practices their faith. So that's one thing. And one usually finds that it's the ones who actually practice their faith who assume the coherent positions on life, religious freedom, marriage, etc. And ones who do not practice their faith assume the opposite position. We find with some leaders, Vice President Biden, Congresswoman Pelosi, that they take advantage of their Catholicism when they believe it is, makes them popular to do so. So Nancy Pelosi said she was praying to St. Joseph for the passage of the health care bill, because I think he is the patron saint of healthcare workers. At least Nancy thought so. I'm not sure. And then Joe Biden will say that Catholicism is the most important thing in his life. So he uses that, and he comes from a very Catholic town. In fact, the part of Pennsylvania where he's from is very Slovak and very Irish immigrant, very Catholic town. And they use it when they think that will gain votes. The bottom line, my last word on this, is that people will vote their pocketbooks, which don't always coincide with their moral values. And this is why you get Catholics voting for people who they believe will give them their economic interests, and they simply ignore the moral questions. Thank you.
Unfortunately, thank you. Unfortunately, I cannot but agree that time flies actually here. And what I want to now is to thank you for an inspiring and encouraging talk that you gave us, and for the light that you shed at this really interesting topic. At the same time, I'm really thankful for the patience and the time that you found and answering all of the questions as well. And please, as a sign of our gratitude, just on behalf of all of us, but from my hands, please receive this memento. Thank you.
Now we can go to Slovakia, or maybe you understand English. Thank you very much for your patience, and wait please the last 5 to 10 minutes. The presentation of this book, What's Marriage, will be announced. There is always a story around every book. This is very interesting that this book started with a...
This first article was published in the Harvard publishing house, and the authors were asked to somewhat broaden the articles. And it was very well received in the academic circles, and it contained both argumentation and counter-argumentation, and as a result this book was published. It is great honor to us that we can present this book here today, and really and truly this is one of the best defenses of traditional viewpoint of the marriage that was ever written. Maybe I can add to it that the book What is Marriage was written by 3 authors that work at the Princeton and Harvard universities. And now I would like to quote the book cover, that this book is not only for the defenders of the traditional marriage, but also for those who oppose it, because it brings rational arguments. And now I would like to invite to the stage director of the Collegium of Anton Neuwirth to say more about this book. Good evening. So this book, which we will briefly introduce to Slovak market with Professor Alvaré, I would like to tell you what this book is not about. This book is not some marriage preparation. Perhaps you can attend some of our courses here at the University Pastoral Center. This book is secondly not about homosexuality, but the book is for all those who have partaken on the discussion where you argued whether the state should or should not adopt the civil union of the same-sex marriage, or why the state should not do it. Is it a discrimination? Is it some limiting of these persons by the state? So if you want to hear an argument from highly educated authors that were dedicated to this topic for long years, why would this adoption would be unjust, I recommend you to read this book. And now, thank you very much for your attention. And now, here comes the festive opening of the book. And we will do it together. As a word of conclusion, I would like to say thank you for participating and thank all the organizers. It was Dave Reichhardt and the Logos Institute for inviting Professor Alvaré here in Slovakia, so thank you very much. Further on, the MEP, Madam Záborská, Collegium of Anton Neuwirth, and the University Pastoral Center for providing this wonderful promises and assistance during the organization of our BHD festival. At the very end, we would like to thank all of you who attended this speech today. And those of you who still have some forces left, we would like to invite you for an event that will be held here at the cafeteria and ask Professor some questions which you didn't have the opportunity to ask during the question sessions. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.